The Israeli military has expanded its ground operations into all areas of the Gaza Strip. Now, after capturing most of northern Gaza, Israeli forces are now pushing into invading the southern region, the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Now, Israeli warplanes and artillery bombarded southern Khan Yunis as well as Rafah. Now, extensive aerial attacks were launched on the town of Khan Yunis, where tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians have sought refuge. The Israeli military issued a statement ordering Palestinians to evacuate half a dozen areas in and around Khan Yunis. In an attempt to minimize casualties, the Israeli forces defined safe areas for Gazan civilians to flee. The Israeli forces dropped leaflets with QR codes that opened a map guiding Gazans to safer areas. They also claim to have uncovered almost 800 Hamas tunnel shafts in Gaza since the ground invasion on the 27th of October. Now, many of the tunnels were in civilian areas like schools, mosques, kindergartens, and playgrounds in the Hamas-run enclave.
Operation in Gaza, we remain committed to our goals: secure the release of our hostages and dismantle Hamas. We will operate as we have done until now, according to international law. We will operate as we have done until now against Hamas centers of gravity. We pursued them in northern Gaza. We're now pursuing Hamas in southern Gaza too. We will operate in maximum force against Hamas terrorists and infrastructures while minimizing harm to the civilian that Hamas places around them as shields. We are giving precise instructions to Gazan residents near Hamas centers of gravity, urging them to temporarily move away from the danger that Hamas puts them in. We're dropping leaflets with QR codes that opens a map guiding Gazans to safer areas.
זיהינו פיר במרחב, בתוך המסגד. שכונת בקשי, בתוך מסגד נמצא פיר.
And I'm joined by Caleb Ben David, who's a senior journalist from Israel. Thank you, Mr. David, for joining us on CNN News 18. When it comes to the entire operation that is gaining momentum when it comes to the ground operations of the IDF in Gaza. Now, whenever it comes to criticizing what Israel is doing in Palestine, the entire argument from the other side is that the entire operation, be it the discovery of tunnels, be it the civilian casualties, be it the safe areas that the IDF is talking about in all its press briefings when it comes to the IDF, that these are all stage managed, that Israel has a history of stage managing conflict to show itself as a more benevolent force than it is on the ground. How do you react to those charges?
First of all, I do want to say I work for I-24 News here in Israel. And all I could say to that charge is it's ridiculous. Are people suggesting that Israel built miles of tunnels to stage manage it, that it moved tons of weaponry? Israel has discovered weapons in kindergartens, in hospitals, in schools, even in mosques. Are people suggesting that Israel moved those weapons there? The atrocities that also October 7th, the atrocities that have been found, the mutilations, the rapes of women that were committed there. You have to understand, most of that is from footage that Israel discovered taken from Hamas fighters that were killed. The Hamas fighters that went in, or terrorists that went in October 7th, were wearing GoPro cameras to record what they were doing. So much of this evidence that Israel is showing to the world was actually, in a sense, sort of produced by Hamas itself. So I think these charges certainly Israel regrets the civilian casualties, but to just that Israel is stage managing anything, if anyone has been stage managing events here, it has, of course, been Hamas.
Right. And Mr. David, when it comes to the hostage situation, many of us were shocked by those visuals about how Hamas attacked those Israeli citizens and, creating that sense of fear in Israeli territory. Now, back here in India, because we ourselves are victims of terror and we understand, we stand in solidarity with what Israel went through. Israel, given its impression on the global stage, has always been a state, a country that has, hit back at terror with an iron fist. Operation Entebbe in Uganda is a legendary operation to us over here in India about how Israel has tackled terror, especially given the fact that it's surrounded by so many hostile forces. Given what happened on October 7th, are questions being asked of the Israeli government?
Absolutely, they are. I do want to take a little issue with saying we hit terrorists. Israel has hit terrorism back with an iron fist. The truth is, Israel has been restrained by certain circumstances in its battle against Hamas. Israel is very dependent on the support of the United States, for example. The United States, over the years, has put certain restraints on Israel's ability. Israel's been restrained by the fact that many countries in the region, Arab countries, and even other countries outside the region, have given refuge to groups like Hamas. Senior Hamas officials are hosted in countries like Turkey, in countries like Qatar. That has limited Israel's ability to battle against Hamas. But certainly the events of October 7th, which were so horrific by even any previous standards, has forced Israel to say we have to throw off some of these restraints and in order to end this threat once and for all. And yes, is there some criticism of the government? Absolutely. There's been, why didn't it better anticipate what was going to happen on October 7th? Why didn't it launch an operation like this sooner over the years to eliminate the threat of Hamas? These are difficult questions. There are no easy answers, but I mentioned one of them, which is that Israel was restrained by some of its allies, the support of the United States and its European countries that say there is a limit to what you can do in the Gaza Strip. And also because Israel knows that it's going to pay with heavy casualties of its own every day. There were more and more casualties, the deaths of 3 more soldiers announced today. So there was a price being paid by Israelis, by the military for this. Over 200,000 people have been relocated from their homes in the south and in the north over it. So it's paying a heavy price. There is some criticism of the government, but I think as a society as a whole right now, Israel's more unified than it's been in many years on the need to finally eradicate the threat of Hamas.
Right. And Mr. David, whenever we talk about Israel and the situation currently in Palestine, the main criticism comes from the other Arab nations who have historically been enemies of Israel. Now, when it comes to the situation within Israel, do you think that there is less information about, the rights and the privileges and the freedoms that Arabs enjoy inside Israel? You think that is a reality that the world, does not know to a great extent, because there is a huge difference between how Arabs are treated inside Israel versus how Palestinian refugees are treated in so many Arabic countries. There is a huge dichotomy between the two, and that is something when it comes to understanding the situation in the Middle East, especially when it comes to Israel versus its hostile neighbors, that is something that never percolates into the public sphere. Would you agree with that?
Right. In fact, I can give you even some statistics. A lot of people don't understand that Israel is a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society. Some 20% of the country are non-Jewish Israelis, mainly Muslims. There's also a significant Druze population in Israel, which is, for those viewers may not know, in India, it's an sort of offshoot of Islam that separates itself from it. There are Christian Arabs, so 20% of that population is Arabic speaking. Now, that population historically has supported Palestinian rights, the Palestinian call for a statehood in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But I have to tell you, and they've identified identified themselves in many ways, some of them as Palestinians. But a poll just released today by one of the research institutions here says that 70% of these Israeli Arabs or Arabic-speaking Israelis feel more Israeli in their identity than ever before following the October 7th attack. And there's a reason for this. One, they, like other Israelis, were shocked by the atrocities that were committed on it. But also keep in mind, many of the victims of the October 7th attack were not all Jews. It was mixed. There were Thai workers, some Taiwanese citizens, Thailandish. Thai workers from Thailand are still being held captive. There were Bedouin Israelis who were killed and are being held captive in Gaza. So they didn't discriminate. They just randomly killed whoever they came across. And so this new poll finds that the largest number ever before of Israeli Arabs feel more Israeli as a result of what's happened on October 7th and since then. Still then, though, yes, there is still that Israeli Arab population that does, as I said, was still supporting Palestinian rights, Palestinian calls for statehood, but certainly over the past 2 months have felt more Israeli or identified with Israel in the wake of the October 7th attack.
Right. Mr. David, if we look at your allies, Israeli allies, the Western nations, we've been seeing multiple protests, even the targeting of Jews in the West, where they've been targeted by a lot of pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine mobs. Just explain for us, decode this for us. How do Gazans and Palestinians live under Hamas rule? Number one, decode that for us. And secondly,
sure.
Is it difficult for you to create a line between Palestine and Hamas, or are they one and the same, given the fact that Hamas was democratically elected?
Right. So let me just a bit of history. That's true that in 2007 there were elections, legislative elections, not for the presidency, which is still held by Mahmoud Abbas, who represents the Fatah movement, which at least officially or on paper has renounced non-violence and agreed to a coexistence with Israel. Officially, though there are many different voices within Fatah, there's an argument about that. So in 2007, it's true that Hamas in Gaza did receive a majority of the votes, but they didn't receive all of the votes. What happened, though, is that they then staged a violent takeover of all of the Gaza Strip and turned it into a complete dictatorship of Hamas and kicked out, in fact, well, I should say more than kicked out. They actually seized power and murdered several members of the Fatah, the rival Palestinian Fatah movement, to seize complete control of the Gaza Strip. In some cases, they literally threw these Fatah members off the roofs of tall buildings in public to seize full control there. And yes, it's been Hamas has run Gaza as a brutal dictatorship. Since then, the best evidence of that is look what happened in the hospitals. Hamas basically turned almost every hospital in Gaza into a military base. They built all their bunkers, their command centers for their fighters under hospitals, under schools, kindergartens, in public centers, in mosques. They exploited the civilian population there. By the way, from time to time, there have been protests that have erupted in Gaza against the rule of Hamas over the conditions there. And each time the leadership of Hamas has brutally repressed those protests, of course, putting people in prison or just killing them outright. So we don't really know. It's hard to say what the real feelings are of the people of Gaza. You can't ask people who are living under a dictatorship in which they could be killed for expressing their free opinion what they really think. So we don't really know. In the meantime, though, we do have the population in the West Bank that is controlled more by the Fatah movement. The majority of the population has not erupted into civil unrest of the type we saw in the so-called Second Intifada 20 years ago. And Israel has made it clear repeatedly, this is not a war against the Palestinians. It's not a war against Gazans, which is why in your report, which we just saw, they've stressed to try to take whatever action they could to safeguard civilians in this conflict, though it's very hard to do when civilians are being used as hostage shields. This is a war specifically against the terror group, the terror movement known as Hamas. And Israel has said that when it is done dealing with Hamas, it wants Palestinians self-rule in the Gaza Strip. It should be up to the Palestinians there to decide how they live their life, but to live it not under the threat of the guns of Hamas, to be able to do it, decide that freely, and also in a way that does not endanger, of course, the security of Israel itself.
Yeah, but the question remains that even if you liberate Gaza and if you eradicate Hamas, and you remove them from Gaza, who will take control of Gaza? Will it be
That's
just
a good
another
question.
avatar of Hamas? My final question, Mr. David, given the fact that Israel has been battling this threat for decades, generations have gone by battling this threat, this existential threat to Israel, do you sense that this is an opportunity to end this reign of terror in your neighborhood once and for all? Or are you in a way restrained by your own allies when it comes to going all out against this terror threat?
I'll ask that question. First of all, yes, there's certainly to reduce the threat from Hamas, and that relates to your question before. What will happen? What will come afterwards? Israel certainly is going to insist on some kind of government that does not pose a security threat to Israel. No one knows yet what's going to happen on the so-called day after. Maybe it'll involve some of the regional countries, the more what we call the more moderate Arab states, like the United Arab Emirates, which has relations with Israel, Bahrain, maybe Egypt will be involved. We don't know. Certainly, Israel hopes to, and it does see this perhaps as an opportunity to do it. But about removing the threat altogether, I have to say, behind Hamas, just like behind Hezbollah, just behind the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who are firing rockets now almost daily and endangering shipping in the Persian Gulf, behind them stands the nation of Iran. And as long as I should say the regime of Israel, not the nation, not the people, the regime in Iran. As long as the current regime in Iran still stands and still poses a regional threat, not just to Israel, but a regional threat, unfortunately, the threat will still remain to Israel, as well as to the other more moderate Arab states in the region.
Right. Thank you, Caleb Ben David, for sharing your perspective with the ongoing operation that's going on in the Gaza Strip, and best of luck when it comes to all of this, this entire military operation when it comes to eradicating this terror threat. We here in India stand in solidarity with Israel because we ourselves are victims of terror, and it should be eradicated in all shapes and forms.